Hey guys, welcome back to the Casual NBA Fanatic podcast. Now today we're just going to be recapping one of my last position list, the all-time positions list that I had. I think I posted about last week, wherever you would have found it, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. But the all-time centers, my top 5 of all time. And we're just going to start off by recapping it. But again, today's episode, like the other ones, we're just going to be going through just the main arguments that did build up the list and contended the list from your perspectives. And I just want to clear the air because there are a lot of differences in how I perceive the game compared to what a lot of other fans typically do as well. And so for the list, just if you guys didn't catch it or you guys want a refresher, very old head leaning. But at number 5, we had Shaquille O'Neal. Number 4, we had Hakeem Olajuwon. Number 3, Wilt Chamberlain. Number 2, Bill Russell. And at number 1, hopefully it's pretty obvious now, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And just starting off with the main arguments that I had with this list and main anticipated arguments as well. And we are living in the 2020s era where we are watching maybe the greatest offensive talent at the center position as well. The greatest offensive talent in general, but he is a center. Still dominating night to night and getting better every single year. And has been the best player in the world for 3 years. So we're seeing this guy dominate, but yet I did leave him off the list. And really that's where the first question is where was Nikola Jokic? Now, Nikola Jokic at this point in time just hasn't amassed the achievements of the other guys that are in this range. That's the main point for me. Quite literally, the guy I had at my number 5 guy, Shaquille O'Neal. We're talking a guy with 4 titles, 2 scoring titles, 3 finals MVPs, obviously an MVP, but 14 All-NBA teams selections. So just that overall body of work is just something Nikola is far from achieving just yet. And so even for Shaq's relatively average longevity case compared to the other guys I do have on this list, that alone even still stands just ahead of what Nikola has done, just analyzing so far what Nikola has done in his career, dominating in this league. Obviously Nikola, yes, he's got 3 MVPs. That is extraordinary. That's insane. And, that does weight differently as well in the modern NBA standards as well with how much talent there is in the league. 3 MVPs probably could equate to something like 4 or 5 MVPs from Shaq's time as well. There's no debating that. But overall, he's only been an All-NBA level player 7 times in his career. And that's just something I just think we have to wait before we Nikola can just outright just leap ahead of all these other guys, especially guys with double that. Shaq, 14 times he was a top 15 player in this league. That's double the years as a top 15 superstar in this league, symbolic-wise. And as far as the case for Nikola Jokic being the best player in the world, Shaq, who I had at number 5, held that title for at least 3 years in the NBA. And tripled the titles that Jokic has in that time where he was the best player in the league. So there are differences there. Again, it is harder to win a championship in today's era, but when we are comparing to the actual overall resume of a guy like Shaquille O'Neal, who I did have at 5, and then even if you want to point into where I had Hakeem, Bill Russell, I just don't think Nikola yet has the resume of the longevity standpoint to contend those guys. And then also just the diversity of accolades can also play into things too. Obviously, he doesn't have any of the defensive, the rebound, the block stuff. That does weight in terms of this greatness scale and how you do get remembered, decades after your career is over as well. And when we are looking at raw impact during their primes, I'm comparing between Jokic and Shaq still. But Jokic to me is the greatest offensive talent of all time. That's no debating. But overall, with what Shaq actually did in his career as the most gravitational inside the arc post-force the game has ever seen, that certainly holds up weight here as well. So it's not just, Jokic was a more talented player than guys like Shaquille O'Neal. And, the ease at which as well to be able to build a top-tier elite offense around a guy like Shaq in that period of time was just so simple at the time of that three-peat. And then, when you go into the aggregate impact of things as well, when you talk about the defensive side of the ball, Denver over the past few years, they've had to be this super cohesive and unbelievably in sync defense in the postseason when they do want to actually get by contending against these high tier athletic squads like your Minnesotas, like your OKCs. And that does drain the ease at which you can completely build a team around a player to a standpoint like Nikola, who does have the athletic, the speed, the lateral limitations defensively, and like it impedes like the ability to construct a roster around that guy. Obviously, not a major impediment, but it's definitely a small one that does factor into this argument here. And like, just to be clear, like I have no doubt Nikola Jokic will land on this list one day. And, he's completely ruled the 2020s decade. There's only so many guys I can say that they did rule a single decade of basketball. And over the first half of this 2020s decade, Nikola has done just that. And this decade is just filled with utter talent parity. And this guy has clearly shown that he's by far the best, head and shoulders above anyone else by an individual talent perspective. And he's done it in such an instrumental way that he will inevitably get onto this list. And if he can claim at least one more title this generation, like with the amount of competitiveness in the league, I think Jokic will actually make extremely strong top 10 all-time debates in general. But at the moment, he does land off my list for maybe just another season or two before he might leapfrog and take over Shaq's spot at number 5 or possibly reach higher. Now, at number 2, we're keeping Shaq in this debate now, but it's more, I think a lot of people had a problem, and like it's also anticipated. He's one of the most adored players of all time. But Shaq being at number 5 did cause a few rifts here, but the Shaq and Hakeem debate is what I want to get into next. Now, another debate that I had hidden in the next argument as well, but I'm just going to break it down here and why Shaq landed 5 and not higher than Hakeem, considering his prime as well. I mean, Shaq's prime alone would land him as the greatest center of all time. But the first debate, quickly, is the one that is completely split by hairs. And it's why I have Hakeem over Shaq. Now, ultimately, went with Hakeem. And it's more because like the actual conditioning throughout his career. That's the first thing. Second of all, the degree of difficulty on his 2 championships, which came in those 2 gap years in the Jordan reign of domination in the 90s. Just the degree of difficulty of that, considering who he had to go up against, but also the actual talent that he had in the roster, especially in that 1994 championship. And I just think in terms of the greatness scale, in terms of achieving those 2 titles, that held a lot to close the gap between their perceived resumes. And Shaq, like when we're talking about like overall talent, when you win your titles, so we're just going to be talking about primes here, but even like when Miami won in 2006 with Shaq, he was playing with the eventual finals MVP of that series, Dwayne Wade. We're talking about a guy that was dropping I think he averaged 35 in that final series alone. But for those first 3 titles, like when he was the 3-time finals MVP, he ultimately was playing next to this, maybe the greatest second fiddle the game has ever seen for any portion of time. And that, obviously, Kobe Bryant. But we're talking about the dude who, during that three-peat as well, sat next to Shaq. And despite being 21, 22, and 23 years old, so extremely young and raw version of himself when those titles came, though, we're talking about a guy who, through just those 3 years, was averaging 25, 5, and 5 in the early 2000s era. And a guy who literally came 3rd in MVP voting during their pairing, like in 2003. Obviously, they didn't win the title, but he came 3rd in MVP voting. So he actually reached a peak where he was averaging 37 and 6 next to Shaq. And this is a guy who just worked his ass off to match Shaq's individual reign. As Shaq quickly declined after that three-peat as well, where he just let his body go fully out the window. And he wasn't, again, the overwhelming best talent in the league, which he was. That short window that we got from Shaq, I actually think holds him back a little bit. Because yes, he did reach that peak, but he didn't sustain it for anywhere near as long as he probably could have if he had the work ethic drilled into him. And so yes, Hakeem as well got to play with some great constructed rosters. I'm not taking that back. Any champion in NBA history really actually had a great roster around them. People say Dirk's championship was the hardest to ever win. I mean, if you go through that roster, that was built and constructed so perfectly. Maybe no other superstars, but a perfectly cohesive roster leaning into the modern NBA principles. That's how they won. Any champion has had a strong roster around them, regardless. It's not just one team with one player who just completely carries the champion through 29 other teams in the league. That just doesn't happen. And so, yes, Hakeem did play with good rosters. I'm not taking that away. But the gap between who he had to play with and Shaq was very, very different in those title years, especially. And like we're talking about in 1994, in that first title, before Clyde Drexler got there, Vernon Maxwell being your second best scorer in the postseason, giving you under 14 points a game in that first title, like that is a very, very big gap, but compared to what you're getting from that 2000 Lakers squad, especially. And I just think there, like the difference of actual help was pretty evident. And so I do weight their championship number, like obviously Shaq with 4, Hakeem with 2. I do like weight that relatively equally in the whole scheme of things, considering the circumstances that they both were given. And Hakeem as well, like when we are talking about like the talent perspective now, he was the more portable talent. And he's literally the greatest defensive talent the game has ever seen too. And so obviously Shaq during that prime was absolutely obscene. But when you're taking their careers in totality, honestly here, I think you're really splitting hairs, and I could honestly see why I would take I haven't given it too much thought with just the individual talent perspective overall, but I would probably nearly lean Hakeem Olajuwon here when you're taking in the defensive freakish stuff. Like, we're talking about a guy with a never-seen-before blend of athleticism, strength, extreme agility, extreme defensive footwork, insane length, insane timing, insane anticipation principles at the center position. And like, just to encapsulate it, I mean, he's the all-time leader in blocks, and he's the only player in NBA history to be top 10 in both blocks and steals for his entire career. Like, that is just insane defensive playmaking and defensive impact in his career. Like, the DPOY trophy is legit named after him for a reason. He won 2 of those in his career. But as a talent, he was the most transcendent defensive talent that we've seen. Maybe you want to throw in Bill Russell or Wilt into those conversations too, but Hakeem in the actual modern era is the greatest defender of all time. And when we are talking about all-time primes as well, like, we glorify Shaq's prime in those 3 years so much, but I mean, Hakeem in those 2 finals runs led the league in scoring in the postseason for both each of those years, but also combined as well. And just to read out the combined stat line of those 2 postseason runs, you will actually see just how dominant that production rate was. And it is very similar to what you got from Shaq from just that basic viewpoint of just basic stat production. But between 1994 and 1995, those 2 playoff runs where Hakeem won, Olajuwon gave you 31 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists, with nearly 5 stocks per game. And he knocked off the greatest bigs of all time just like flies with a swatter. Like, we're talking Charles Barkley, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing, Karl Malone, and yours truly, Shaquille O'Neal, just all absolutely destroyed in just those 2 years. And so when we're reviewing the body of work and the diversity of impact that he brought as maybe the most well-rounded talent the game has ever seen at the center position, with maybe the exception of Wilt Chamberlain, and Bill Walton might even have a case up there, who knows. But Hakeem, for me, takes this battle with Shaq, with just how much more overwhelming he was as a defensive talent, who performed with this shot creation art out of the post that just made him simply the most unguardable big in an era ruled by big men. And so that's why I do have him over there. But leading into more like why Shaq didn't settle higher, that was mostly to do with the lack of conditioning during his prime. Yes, obviously Shaq had an extreme prime, like that 3 intensified years were absolutely unbelievable. And even when he was out of shape as well, not in that 3-peat prime section as well, even away from that, he was still dominating at a top 5 level at the very least for a large majority of time. But just the lack of commitment and continued development of what made him so overly advantageous, and that was his body and his athleticism, that deprives him, for me, to a pretty large degree when we are talking about your greatness as an athlete and influence and role model for other players trying to like aspire to be like you. And like, this is no disrespectful stand at all time. Like, I've legit got Shaq ahead of Nikola Jokic. You know, I got him ahead of like Moses Malone and other greats as well. And this is the most congested position of all-time talent that we've ever seen in the NBA. And it's just a testament to what actually Shaq did do to actually even have him on this list. Just the guy, like the guys I do have, again, like in the greatness perspective, the guys I do have above him, they just simply did more than Shaq did in their respective eras in the way I perceive things. Now, moving on to the next part, I just want to clear up the air with just the old head arguments between really just Wilt and Bill Russell. Because, again, we're not talking about the best talents. Because, realistically, Bill Russell isn't surviving in today's league. Maybe the athleticism makes him like a somewhat useful defensive player, but the skill set wise was very raw. Obviously, if you go back and watch that time, like he was a very good passer, really great transition player as well, like for his time and stuff. Great initiating passing hub for the time. But obviously, you chucked that version of Bill Russell in today's version into an NBA series of 7 tomorrow. Like, you're getting a very different version of it, NBA player. Like, he's not dominating like he did back then, impact-wise, by any means. But this is a greatness debate. And just the confusion around why I do have the old heads here being a bit higher than Shaq. Like, again, I'm talking, obviously Bill and Wilt will be questioned here, but even some people would have a knock at Kareem being higher than Shaq. But we can't mistake talent here. Shaq was so immensely talented. Even more so, like I'd say Shaq was more talented than Wilt or Kareem, maybe. But again, those guys to me just had greater careers in their time and dominated their eras for either longer or more extravagantly, and either from a team success standpoint or from, a domineering individual talent standpoint, like with Wilt. And that kind of summed up the overall argument. Shaq never reached the winning that Bill Russell did. I don't think he reached that insane individual overwhelming heights that Wilt did for the time that Wilt was actually in the league for it as well. And obviously, if you put these guys against each other in any era, guys like, even Nikola Jokic and Shaq, Hakeem, heck, even like your Wembys, your Şengün's, your Karl-Anthony Towns, your Holmgrens, your Embiids of recent time, like those guys even hold it like at least a strong argument to be more talented and just better at basketball against even a guy like Bill Russell by the talent comparison. But just the achievements in their era is just something that, at least for Bill's case, is still unmatched. And that's why, for me, both Wilt and Bill just set the blueprint for their position in such a transcendent manner. And they certainly belong here for the position that was mostly ruled by guys in the 20th century. They put the DNA into what centers needed to thrive in, to be successful in this league. And that is greatness to me. And I don't think any centers, even from today's perspective, yes, they might be more talented and better, more skilled, more variety of impact, if you wanted to say as well, with just the spacing and ball handling principles that are more evident in today's NBA. But they didn't achieve and affect the game the way that these guys did. And that's why they are a number 2 and 3 for a position that was dominated mostly in the 1900s. And let's go into resumes quickly as well, just to wrap this little section up, because I know not too many people want to hear too much about old heads. But Bill Russell, his resume, 11 All-NBA selections, 5 MVPs, 11 championships, and he did that in 13 years. And that included 8 titles in a row and 4 rebounding titles. And that goes with probably what would have been a split share of block titles as well with Wilt if they were tracked in the 50s and 60s era. And then you go on to Wilt. The only player with scoring, rebounding, and assist titles, which already says enough about just the individual talent that he was at the time. And on those, on those titles, he led the league in scoring 7 times. He led the league in rebounding 11 times. Again, you might add on the block titles if they were actually around at that time. And he also still won 2 championships and a finals MVP in the only year that he actually won that finals MVP award was actually given out as well. He won it. Bill Russell wasn't around. I think in 1969 is when they gave out the award, but they gave it to Jerry West, who lost that series as well. But he did that in 14 years. He also, Wilt again, 4 MVPs and a decade of All-NBA selections as well in those 14 years. And so, from the way that I perceive and evaluate the era comparison, these guys are my 3rd and 2nd greatest centers to ever play the game. Now, the last thing I want to tick off is why, like, and to be honest, I think this would have been the least things people would have argued with, but why Kareem to me was the obvious number one center of all time. And this is my last point to cover, but really, I just think he's the great center of NBA basketball. I think like we'll start off resume wise just to get this stuff out of the way. 6 MVPs, 6 titles, 15 All NBA selections, and 19 All Star selections. He also had 2 Finals MVPs, 2 scoring titles, 11 All Defensive selections, and he also added 4 block titles, a rebounding title, and a 20-year career average of 25 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 blocks. And he's the only player in NBA history to be top 5 all time in points, rebounds, blocks, and games played. And that decorated to what is to me the 3rd greatest individual resume in NBA history when you combine the actual winning and the individual dominance factors that that's why he's in the GOAT debate. He blended those two completely perfectly. And he may be the greatest half-court possession-based scorer that we've ever seen when he was in those prime years. And that's because this dude's over-the-top release point advantages were so obscene. And what he brought at the center position to have release point advantages over centers, over any center that he would have gone up against, that is an insane advantage to go up against on any night. And legit, it was almost impossible to contest and waver his actual shot for his time out of the post and his actual balance on those skyhook releases. And you get into it, the overall shot touch on just such a contorted release angle as well. That just made him so unfair as a scoring force. And that you couldn't actually waver his perfected shot touch. And, when you're matching that with just the general length and the size that he brought on the defensive side of the ball, 11 all defense selections is very valuable when you're trying to build around, when you're trying to set the tone for your franchise around a guy for that long, like what Milwaukee and what LA did. It's just very easy when you have a stable rim protector. And though Kareem was never the greatest at, absorbing true physicality, or he was never the guy with the highest defensive motor by any means, but Kareem, just defensively, was just gifted with the length and size. And he can easily make an argument for being one of the top 3 talents at the center position alone. We're just talking about individual talent itself, even comparing to guys of today's era as well. And so, yes, obviously a ton of people making an argument won 6 titles, but he only won 2 finals MVPs. Obviously that is a valid argument, but the thing is, he did share the floor with Magic and Worthy. That was a byproduct why he does only have 2 finals MVPs. And, he played with a ton of other all-time great supporting cast guys as well. There's no, understating that. But at least, I'll try cushion at least the 1980 championship run where Kareem was 100% going to get that finals MVP. And you guys might know this is the year that Magic had to drop the infamous 42-15 in 7 game in Game 6 on the road in his rookie year, taking Kareem's spot at the center position. You've heard it a lot. But Kareem, before he sprayed that ankle in Game 5, he was giving the Sixers 33 points, 14 rebounds, and 5 blocks in those initial 5 games to put LA up 3-2 initially in that series anyways. And so, this guy just contributed to the highest level for 2 franchises and actually held he held the undisputed title as the GOAT of the NBA for a single portion of time before MJ came along, at least before Michael came along. And for the overall resume and the overall impact through that entire 70s decade as well, as the most overwhelming best player in the league for a long, long time, probably more so than what MJ could have done in rivaling the time that LeBron has spent as the best player in the league, matched with the individual dominance of the 70s, matched with the winning that he did in the 80s. That cements Kareem as my greatest center of all time, and why I do have him as the 3rd greatest player in NBA history. Now, obviously, talent at the center position is growing more. I know Embiid's on the decline, but you do have guys like your Chet and Şengün's. They're 2 guys that I really believe in for the future. Obviously, Victor Wembanyama may turn out to be the GOAT of basketball and may take the number 1 spot on this list one day. But at the moment, this is how I perceive the 5 guys. These are 5 guys that all played in the 90s as well. It's because their resumes were just that insane but also their talent in the era where centers were the most coveted asset initially was just so extravagant for me. And that's how I ranked these guys initially. Hopefully, I'm the biggest Nikola Jokic believer, and I think 100% he'll land here one day. If I had to put a bet on, I wouldn't be surprised if he lands here at least 3 or 4 on this list. Just got to see more on the accolade side with him. The talent side is no question with Nikola. I think he'll be here one day. But that's how I ranked all the positions. So there we go. We got the point guards, shooting guards, small forwards, power forwards. Now we just finished up with the centers. I'm going to find another list to rank because I actually do like making these rankings and then going through it with you guys as well. It's been really fun. And obviously this has been a really fun part of the year as well. We just got past the Christmas games not long ago. We're going to be heading into the new year in 2026. It's weird. Obviously San Antonio look like the best team in the NBA right now, but we're going to have to see how it ebbs and flows throughout next actual calendar year. And I'll find something else to rank, but I thank you guys for tuning in for this one, and I'll let you guys go and stay tuned, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.